Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Global Tracheostomy Collaborative's webinar on developing a successful tracheostomy education program. With us today, to my left, is Dr. Samuel Osterauer, and he is the Medical Director of the Otolaryngology and Head and Neck Surgery at the Joe DiMaggio Children's Hospital in Hollywood, Florida. And across the Atlantic in the United Kingdom is Dr. Ram Dillon. He is at the Northwick Park Hospital in London. He is also the clinical director of the Rila Institute of Health Sciences in London. And up in Boston, you can't see her, but she's here, is Haley Rayburn, and she is running the control panel. And I am Diane Randall. I am a respiratory therapist. I am also the patient and staff tracheostomy educator for the Joe DiMaggio Children's Hospital. Again, welcome for everybody. So some of the things that we're going to be talking about today, we're going to look at some of the effective teaching methods that might be helpful when you put together an education program. We're going to take a look at some of the problems that you might have looking at generational learning differences. We're going to also look at identify some patient goals and some patient and staff education strategies. And we're also going to find out what we can learn from our students when we have feedback to improve the process. So a little bit about us. Sam?
So Joe DiMaggio Children's Hospital is a community hospital, part of a large public healthcare system here in Broward County, Florida. Broward County is just north of Miami-Dade, at the southern tip of the southeastern tip of the United States. Joe DiMaggio was founded in about 1992 as a children's hospital within Memorial Regional Hospital, which was at the time an adult facility. And the hospital has grown rapidly over the course of the last 20 years or so, 25 years. We just celebrated our anniversary. And in 2011, we opened a freestanding children's hospital, which you can see pictured here. Our freestanding children's hospital houses approximately 225 beds, about 25 to 28 pediatric ICU beds with chronic ventilator beds as well, and more than 80 level 3 neonatology NICU beds. Our namesake is Joe DiMaggio, who, for those of you who live in the United States, you know well. But for those of you overseas, not familiar with United States celebrity and baseball, Joe DiMaggio is an American icon. He played baseball for the New York Yankees and has a storied career both on the field and off. He has a hitting record for several years, was known as the Yankee Clipper, and off the field he was known for his marriage to Marilyn Monroe. Sorry for the blackout here. And in 1992 he agreed to donate his name to the Children's Hospital. The hospital paid him no money for the use of his name, and we've been lucky to have his name and his support. Unfortunately, he died in 1999 of natural causes, and oddly enough, at the time of his death, he did have a tracheostomy for which he begged the nurses and doctors to take out with storied language. We'll leave it at that.
Next to him, of course, is Lou Gehrig, who was also one of his teammates. So when you're getting ready to put together a tracheostomy education program or any kind of a medical education program, what you want to do is you're going to want to look at the evidence-based practice. And what this is the result of that is put together by experts on how to, that guide you to take care of some health decisions. We were very fortunate when we joined the Global Tracheostomy Collaborative because there was a lot of members there that were able to share with us some of the information and guide us to where we could find what the best practices were. So another thing that you want to do is you want to set up your standards of care. Now, this is not a medical term. This is actually a legal term, and what it is it's the level of practice that is given in a different community. And there's different standards from different communities. For example, I'm a respiratory therapist. I'm going to have a different set of standards of care than, say, Dr. Osterauer, who is a physician. He is also going to have a different level of care. I'm not going to perform any surgeries, and he is not going to be touching any of the knobs on my ventilator, or he better not. So, and also to keep in mind that the standards of care change as technology changes.
So as we develop education programs, we need to be clear what our principles are and what our guidelines are for both short-term and long-term care. For those who we're educating, if we have clear criteria for what we need to learn, when we're going to learn it, and how we're going to ascertain whether it's actually been learned, we have to be clear about that, and we have to communicate that clearly. Once we develop those principles, we put those methods into operation, both with multimedia type of educational opportunities, which we'll go into as we progress through our talk today, and all of those are geared towards reaching optimal outcomes for our patients.
So when you're starting to think about how to go about teaching your patients or your staff members, you want to think about some teaching strategies. You have to be clear with the information that you're going to be giving to them so that they're going to be able to understand the things that you're trying to teach them. One of the things that you want to do is you want to get involved in a discussion. So you want to see what their interest level is, and you want to see if they actually understand what it is that you are teaching them. You're going to be looking for some kind of feedback from them. It's a kind of a give and take. You know, do you understand things, yes or no? And then when you look at assessments, if you tell a family that you're going to be giving them a test, they might get a little nervous. So what we've developed is a thing called a ticket to ride, where basically what this is I ask them to fill in some answers so I get an idea of how far they've come along and if they need any kind of a review. So looking at some different teaching methods, a lot of families, they like to have written instructions, and what I have here is a picture of the book that I give to all of my families. Everything I teach my families is in this book. So they have something to refer to. You have to remember, we teach children, and the families have just been told that their child is going to be probably going home with a plastic tube in their neck, and they're very upset. They don't know, a lot of times they don't know what it is that you're talking about after the first 5 minutes. They have a book that is something to refer to. Another method is lecture, which they're going to be getting up and you're going to be talking to them. You're going to be discussing things. You're going to be coaching them. You're going to be showing them how to do that and helping them to do things. And then what you want to do is look at the way that they think. You're going to observe their critical thinking. You're going to give them a task and ask them to come to an endpoint and watch their thinking process of how they come to the endpoint. The best type of teaching methods is a combination of all three of these methods. Now, when you think about processes, think about senses. You think about seeing, you think about hearing, you think about touching. Different people like to learn through different senses. Some people like to read. They like to see you doing things. They like to hear you talk about how to do things. And there are some people that like to touch things. They like to take things apart and put them back together. And then there would be the hybrid, which would be a combination of all of these things. So because we are a pediatric hospital, a lot of our adult learners are with a very large discrepancy of ages. I might have a mother that is 18 years old that needs to learn how to take care of her child that has a tracheostomy, or I might have a 68-year-old great-grandmother who will also be helping with that. What you have to do is you have to adjust your teaching to what it is that they're doing. Now, different people from different generations learned differently. There was the generation that was around World War II where they were mostly quiet and observant. They stood back. They didn't ask a lot of questions. Then there was the baby boomer generation. What happened was there was a teacher that stood up in the front of the class and they lectured all day long. They told them to read. They gave them assignments. They gave them reading assignments so that when they came back the next day, that they also learned to, okay, then there's Generation X. Okay, this was a generation where they actually learned in different modules. What happens is it's like they would learn a segment, and then after they learned, then they would do actual activities that would relate to this, to the things that they had already learned. Now, the nice thing about this generation is they were at the very beginning of the technology boom. So this generation has they were able to use a lot of everything. The millennials and the Generation Y and Z. This generation really is very technology-based, and what they like to do is when they research things, they actually like to use their technology.
So a major component of reaching the outcomes we're all searching for, which is ultimately reducing morbidity, reducing mortality in our tracheostomy patients, a major arm of our education program has been educating our staff. If for those of you joining us in Dallas at the International Symposium coming up in February, we'll be presenting our own data on how staff education, patient education, and our involvement in the GTC has reduced not only morbidity and mortality, but has reduced length of stay in our facility. And this has a lot to do with the education program that we've instilled for our staff and with our patients and their families. But as part of that, it's unifying our practices. In our hospital, we've had a number of different surgeons, and up until 2014, when we joined the GTC, we had multiple departments performing tracheostomies in the pediatric population. So we've unified our practices, and we've really trained many hospital staff, nurses, respiratory cares, and ancillary staff. At this point, Diane, who's led the staff education program, we've educated more than 1,000 employees in the Children's Hospital and throughout our healthcare system on tracheostomy safety and tracheostomy care. Go ahead.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about patient and family education, and this is something that is very close to me. When I find out that there is a patient that is going to be receiving a tracheostomy, I like to get into contact with the patient very early. They don't know what it is. They have this idea that they've got a child and everything is going to be fine with their child. Now they find out that they're going to be having to take home their child with a plastic tube in their neck and possibly on a ventilator, and things are just not going to be the same. They don't know which end is up. And what I like to do is come in there and tell them that I'm with them through this entire journey. Some of the things that I do is I set goals for them as far as doing the education, and then I ask them to set some goals for themselves. We also look into some kind of a support system. Is there an older sibling that lives at home that can help? Or is there aunts, is there uncles, or their grandparents? Anybody that is going to be coming in and helping with taking care of this child. Another big thing is we have other families that have already taken this journey of taking a child home, and we reach out to them and ask them if they could possibly speak to these families, because they can speak to them from a different point that no one else can. They've already been through this. They can help the families through their experiences. So a few of the challenges. We live in South Florida here, and South Florida is a very diverse community. And we have people living here from all over the world. Sometimes language can be a barrier, and communication is very, very important. The book that I showed you earlier, I have that translated into 4 different languages. We also have the use of a video translator, so that when we actually do a one-on-one teaching with the family, it will actually be me and the individual that is learning and someone that is on the video translator. So it's like a 3-way conversation. It can be a little challenging, but it does work. I have to also recognize that there are people that have different customs, and I have to respect that. I also realize that there are some of my families that I teach that they didn't finish school at all. I may go from that all the way up to a physician. You just have to adjust how you're going to be teaching. When you have families that have younger siblings and they don't have any babysitting care, I really heavily rely on our child life specialists to help us to take care of the siblings so that we are able to do the education to the families. Another thing is families arranging time for education. This is very important, and you know, life goes on. People have jobs, and sometimes that can be really difficult. So I'm going to let Dr. Osterauer talk to you about our visual that helps our families.
So as part of our patient and family education program, we can show them videos, we can talk to them, we can lecture them, they can change trachs on our trach mannequins until they're blue in the face, but having something visual that allows them to know exactly where they are, where they've been, and where they need to go in order to reach certain goals has been very well received, and I think has helped us to help them along the process. So we've created this nice, Diane has created this very nice cartoon visual in the theme of Joe DiMaggio in a baseball field, where from the time that the child has been identified as requiring a tracheostomy, that's where they're on deck, to where they're at bat, receive a tracheostomy, and then circle the bases and ultimately reach home plate, where they undergo their education, their experiential learning, changing the trach, learning how to suction, taking their quote-unquote ticket to ride test to home plate, which is actually leaving the hospital. We have certain criteria. The team that we've composed for this education and for everyone involved to reach these certain goals is made up of the patient, who's the quote-unquote MVP. The co-managers are the physicians, including surgeon, who are caring for the patient to receive a tracheostomy. We have 3 key players who are the family or primary caregivers who will be providing care in the home once the patient is discharged, and our 3 coaches who are invariably Diane, our master trach educator, as well as our secondary respiratory therapist and nursing staff. So as I mentioned on the cartoon, we have a series of positions that have to be passed in order for the patient to ultimately be discharged. The on deck is before the patient receives the trach, when we introduce tracheostomy to the patient and the family, who's going to be helping them along the way, and what goals need to be achieved to reach discharge. At this point, we educate them a bit about what the tracheostomy is going to mean for them and their family, and what care entails. And that's when they receive their tracheostomy education book and start the process of learning about the procedure and about the trach itself and post-op care. Batter up is when they receive their trach. First base is the path to first base is when they start the learning process and practice changing a trach, practice suctioning on our special tracheostomy mannequins. At first base, the first trach change typically happens in our hospital on postoperative day 7. We've protocolized that. And the second base path on the way from first to second base is when the key players, the family members, start changing the trach on the patient themselves and get ready for suctioning and whatnot. Third base path from second to third base is when the additional caregivers at home, the key players who are also going to be taking care of these patients at home, practice their additional trach changes. Each caregiver has to do 2 trach changes before they leave the hospital. On third base, everyone is providing trach and ventilatory care with respect to the key players. And on the path to home base is when we're finalizing these processes, getting the equipment delivered to home and becoming familiar with all of the home care. And of course, home plate is when the patient is ultimately discharged. Okay. The home team roster is made up of the patient, of course. The co-managers are still the physicians who the patient is following up with, and home care staff are the key players, and the coaches are the trained family caregivers, the key players on the inpatient side. Once they are at home, we have a second cartoon to keep them on track, because once they go home, ultimately we're hoping that the tracheostomy is removed. And again, we have a well-defined sequence of events as they round the bases, from weaning the vent to speaking valve and to capping the trach to ultimate decannulation.
Some of the things that might be useful is having one-on-one education. This would mean one educator with either one of the caregivers or one of the families, and they actually have a dedicated time for teaching. So in other words, when we have a tracheostomy educator, they do not have anything else to be responsible for. Their only responsibility at that time is making sure that the family is educated.
So again, we use multimedia. We do have a series of tracheostomy videos to help educate them. We have the tracheostomy manual, which is written instructions. We have tracheostomy signs, which are placed around the room, and of course the mannequin for experiential learning.
Okay, so now is the time when the teacher becomes the student. And what I have found is what most of our families want is a continuity of care. We're telling them that this is the best way to take care of their child, their tracheostomy. And they want to make sure that every single staff member that takes care of their child is giving them the same care that we're teaching them to do. So this all goes back to when you get your best practices, when you develop your standards of care, and when you put together your policies and procedures, and then you do the implementation to educate your staff members. The last thing that I do is I give my families a survey just before they leave, and I ask them, do you feel comfortable taking care of your child and their tracheostomy? What did you like? What did you not like? But most important, what is it that we can do to improve our program?
So in the end, asking about and visualizing goals is very important both for staff and patients and families alike, so we know where we're coming from and where we need to go to achieve our goals. As we go through the education process, both for staff and patients, families alike, identifying individual attention spans and being open to teaching what the individual family or staff member needs to learn in order to reach a certain comfort level. And then, of course, reading our students and understanding what their strengths and weaknesses are, and ultimately doing all of this in a supportive, patient and family-centered environment is what we're all trying to achieve.
Okay, I think that that's us from here. So what we wanted to do is take everything over to Ram over in London. Okay, Haley, can you do that for us?
Am I on now,
Okay.
Haley? Is that all right? Let me just get rid of that.
You can hear me?
You can hear me and you can see the screen. Is that all right? It's good. Yes, good evening or good afternoon or good night, depending on where you are in the world. You can see the Christmas decorations that side. So we're nearing Christmas here. And there's a rather fancy picture that my wife spent a lot of money on, sitting on the right side of my ear as well. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to talk about specifically a training program that we have developed, which will encompass a lot of the things that Diane and Sam have already said. And although Sam and Diane have concentrated mainly on children, naturally, because they're in a children's hospital, the model that I'm going to present, we've been delivering for about 2 years. If we could go to the next slide.
Ram, share your screen.
Share your screen, Ram.
Oh, sorry. Sorry, I haven't done that yet. Sorry. Can you see it now? It says show screen here. You got it? Okay, sorry about that. Okay, let's start again. We were talking about Diane and Sam's general principles about education, but what I want to present is a model that we have developed, which is mainly adult orientated, but it has a component that is also children orientated. And although it encompasses, as you can see here, both tracheostomy, a certification in tracheostomy, there is a small component in laryngectomy, but the vast majority of this course that we have developed is about tracheostomy. So you saw in one of the slides that were presented earlier on a blended form of learning, and this is what we've tried to do in this particular program that I will describe. So a blended form of learning which has a number of components. So these components would be face-to-face, lectures, hands-on workshops, also interactive webinars similar to what you're participating in now. We also have a clinical logbook which details the practical skills that individuals will need to develop, starting from where they are at the present moment and then leading through 2 or 3 grades so that they can perform these skills in isolation, so they don't need any supervision. And this is done through a mentorship network, and this is very important, that you have somebody senior and more experienced than yourself teaching you the practical skills training. And finally, we have forms of assessment. Again, this was mentioned by Diane and Sam. We have formative assessments as you go through the program, which is, if you like, self-assessment, and that allows you to, sorry, why has that gone forward? Let's go back. Diane, what happened there? All right. Okay. Are you back on screen there? Right. Then we have a final summative assessment, which is actually very important because we can have a cuddly, warming type educational program, but we need to ensure that everybody has reached a certain minimum threshold of knowledge and skills before we can certify them. And importantly, you see at the top of this slide that we've called it blended learning and work-based. So this is not taking individuals out of their workplace and bringing them to a third-party location to tell them what to do. We have used this program and developed this program so that it can be done while the individual is at work. So who is this for? Well, the original idea, and I'll describe the details of the program in just a moment, is that all healthcare professionals involved in trachea care. So we're looking at not just clinicians, but nurses, speech and language therapists, and physiotherapists. And we're not just looking at, for example, nurses in the ward, we're looking at nurses and these allied health professionals in intensive care units and also in the community. One of the ideas that we did have was that everybody who is looking after tracheostomy patients, all the stakeholders, should all be trained at this minimum threshold level. And the reason for developing the program and having this minimum threshold was that in the UK in 2014, there was a confidential study done on, it's called NCEPOD, N-C-E-P-O-D, which basically looks at mortality and morbidity in various types of medical care. And it became apparent during a study done on tracheostomy care that the degree of mortality and morbidity was dependent very much on the amount of education and experience that individuals had. And the study was initiated, the inquiry was initiated because there have been a number of unnecessary deaths that could have been prevented. And the fundamental conclusion of this study was that tracheostomy care is really devolved down in many, many instances, far too many instances, to individuals who have little or no or very poor knowledge of tracheostomy care. And that formal certification of tracheostomy ought to be brought in some form of or fashion. Certainly having individual single days of skills training is very good and very good for continuing professional development, but something more fundamental than that was required, because if you take thousands of individuals delivering care in tracheostomy, the numbers that have the minimum threshold would be 5% or 10%. So the vast majority will be practicing without the requisite knowledge and skills. And that's what we wanted to try and counteract and improve. So this is the program. If you, sorry, keeps running on a bit too fast. Let's go back. Are you still with me? I'm not sure why that one is still there.
How's that? How's that?
No, I need to go back. One, which is really the crux of.
Back one?
Yeah, I can't see it on my screen yet.
Perhaps if you keep going back, it might show up.
Yeah, the problem is that it's got it's got part of the slide in it, which is really annoying. No, it's. Sorry about this. That's the one I need, but it's got I don't know what's happened here. Part of the previous slide has actually ended up on it for some reason. Haley, is there any way of going back to the slide that Diana had? Continuing on from that. And she could take it. This is the most important slide.
All right.
Haley, is that possible?
Yes.
I'm not sure what's happened there. Okay, so we go forward one. Yeah, just go forward
That
one more. Next one. That's it. Look, sorry, back one. Right, perfect. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Diane, thank you. If you look at this rather complicated diagram, the essence of it is there's a spine. If you look to the far left, there's registration. That's registering for the program. And then you have a central spine that leads horizontally to a final summative exam. The distance or time from the initial registration and workshops to the final summative exam is about 4 months, 3.5, 4 months. So we expect a certification minimum threshold for the individual participating in such a program over about 3.5, 4 months. So we start with number 1, bottom left, which is 1 day of lectures and hands-on workshops. That's the face-to-face component. We then allow the individuals to go back to base to complete sections 2, top right, which is 14 core topics in tracheostomy care. There's a component in laryngectomy there, and there's a component even in pediatric tracheostomy, which we think is very important, ladies and gentlemen. But there are 14 key topics. There were 12 when we started a couple of years ago, but we've added 2 more because we consider those are important. And as Diane and Sam mentioned earlier on, we got feedback of what people thought was missing, and therefore we have changed the number of topics. And these are called directed learning topics. There's an e-platform on which these topics are housed. You can access the topics before the children go to bed, after the children go to bed, before you go and see your grandparents, after you've had lunch, lunchtime if you have an hour at work, whenever you wish. So it's very flexible. And each topic has a formative assessment attached to it. So once you've read the topic, there are a series of what we call higher order thinking questions based on that topic. And these questions you can answer, you can save before submitting them. This gives you an opportunity to interact with your colleagues if you're not entirely sure of what the answers might be. So there's a sort of interactive component built into the formative assessment. And then you can submit it. And you're required to pass it in the sense that we expect you to achieve at least 60% in the formative assessment. You can have 2 attempts if you so wish. And this happens during that 3.5 month period. And then if you look at 3 and 4, you will probably recall the clinical logbook, clinical activities skills booklet. This details the core practical skills that are required from where you're starting to a point where you can perform these skills and practical procedures without supervision. So it's not something that you would do in the first week or so. It will take 2, 3, 4 months for you to get to that requisite level of skill. And combined with that, we have a series of interactive webinars, similar to what you're having at the moment. We also have a chat box, and there's 4 or 5 of these during that period of 3.5, 4 months. And then if you go to number 5, there's the dreaded mini tests and exams. Again, these are formative tests and exams, but these are different from the formative assessment in number 2. Those mini tests and exams in number 5, there are about 3 of them as you go through the program. They test a series of topics. So once you've done the individual assessments, formative assessments on individual topics, then a mini test will test 4 or 5, 3 or 4 of these topics. And the important difference with the mini test is that it's time sensitive, usually 60 minutes. So it's like real life. You're given a problem, you've got to assess it, you've got to make a decision and put an answer down. So that is real life. And you have 60 minutes to complete the exam. Again, you're allowed 2 attempts because this is not a pass or fail in that sense, but you can have 2 attempts. So if you complete numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you then come and have a half day of a final summative exam. And the final summative exam, as it suggests, examines the whole of the program. And the final summative exam is very much based on the similar model to the mini test and mini exams, except that it's now covering the whole of the program. And as I mentioned to you earlier on, the types of assessments we have is called higher order thinking questions. And these are detailed under number 6, consisting of EMQs, which you've probably come across, extended matching questions, and single best answer or single best option questions, and clinical quiz questions. Basically, these higher order thinking examination assessment questions mimic the thinking process that you do clinically, nursing or clinicians. So you can't guess the answers. They're not true-false answers where a monkey could get 50%. It's not possible to get 50% by guessing these. So unless you've got the requisite knowledge and skills, you will not pass the final summative exam. However, since every individual pretty much that comes on this course is self-selected, their parents haven't told them to go on it, they haven't necessarily been pushed by their senior colleagues, they're self-motivated, and therefore we find that the pass rate is extremely high, you know, mid-late 90s easily. And it's quite easy to identify those individuals that aren't going to pass because they tend to fail everything in the 1, 2s, 3s, and 4s. And we provide a certification which is underwritten, if you like, at the moment by 3 organisations: ENT UK, which is the national professional organisation for ear, nose and throat surgeons who primarily in the UK look after tracheostomy, and it's accredited for 42 hours of CPD. I don't know what that equates to the Yankees, but it must be something similar. It's also recognised and approved by the British Laryngological Association, and it's also approved by the Difficult Airway Society at the bottom, DAS, Difficult Airway Society. And we're hoping at some stage maybe the GTC will also approve it if we can twist their arm a little bit. So that is the program. It's a blended form of learning, as you can see, and it's work-based, so it's very practically orientated. You do the program where you're going to deliver the care in an environment where you can learn and you will have a mentorship, and we provide an overarching framework in which you can participate and reach the threshold that's required for a certification. Now, we have been delivering this for about 2 years, primarily in the UK, but we're very keen, since we have spent months and months and months and months and months developing this program and fine-tuning it. And our reviews, again, Diane and Sam mentioned that it's very important to review how individual professional healthcare people have benefited from the program, and they have benefited greatly, but also how patients have. We have evaluations done, so they feel their patients have also benefited. So we would like to take this program or offer it to you wherever your particular region is. Can we go to the next one, please, Diane? There we are, questions. My contact details are there. I'm very happy to be emailed. I'm quite happy to be called on the mobile, provided you understand the time difference. Okay, I'm in London, so just be careful when you call me that it's not 5 o'clock in the morning, although I'm usually up by 5. Just be wary of the time difference. And if you go to the website, www.gpcourses.co, and click on programs and then scroll down for the certification, you can get a lot more detail than I've been able to provide at the moment. So if you are interested in learning more about the course, or maybe us delivering it in your local region, I'd be very happy to hear from you. Thank you very much.
All right, so now we're going to answer a few questions. I'm Haley Rayburn. I'm going to be fielding the questions. Thank you all for joining us today. We have a question from Jennifer, and she says, I'm developing a tracheostomy education video for residents. What is your advice? Can you direct us to any resources you have to avoid reinventing the wheel?
There is, if you go on kidshealth.org, which is through the Nemours program. They have developed, I think, 6 tracheostomy videos. We have access to them through our, the Get Well network that is actually on our television. We subscribe to the Get Well network, and the videos are actually through them. And they do have one video that I think that if you look on the web, it is Parent Talk, where they're discussing with families of children with a tracheostomy what it is like to have a child. You will be able to see that on the internet. All the other ones I think that you have to actually subscribe to, but it is www.kidshealth.org, which may be able to help you out.
Can I also answer? Yeah. The Global Tracheostomy Collaborative has an individual called Brendan McGrath, who's very, very active within the GTC. He's based in Manchester, in north of England, and he's produced a number of videos. Now, I can't quite remember exactly the details, but I'm sure you'll be able to contact Brendan McGrath through the GTC, and they may well be available through the GTC as well. But Brendan McGrath is the name, and he's based in Manchester in the UK. And I'm sure if you just Google him, that famous information hub, you'll be able to locate him. But there are a number of videos already available, and we have 1 or 2 of these incorporated in our program anyway. So I strongly recommend that you don't waste a huge amount of energy on stuff that's already out there. Very well done. A 1-minute video will take you at least 12 hours of work, maybe more. So if you do a 5-minute video, it's 60, 70, 80 hours worth of work, which is a tremendous amount of work. It's already been done. I strongly recommend that you take up the offer that Diana's given you, and also perhaps contact Brendan McGrath.
Mm-hmm. All right. We're getting quite a few questions right now. Diane, people are very happy with your baseball tool. One question here is, how do you prepare families for managing emergency respiratory distress or mucus plug? And another related question asks, if you have taught someone how to do something, is your facility liable if they run into any issues?
I think our facility would be more liable if we didn't teach them. We actually take them through, we actually have something that we laminate, and I usually tell them to put it over the child's bed of what to do if they have a tracheostomy emergency, such as if the trach becomes plugged, we say then you go to suction them, but if you can't pass the suction catheter, then you have to change the trach. If they can't get the same size trach in, then they go to the smaller trach. If they are not able to get the smaller trach in, then they have to do bag valve mask and call 911. So this is something what Dr. Dillon was talking about was through the National Tracheostomy Safety Project of the UK. We took a lot of their suggestions and kind of put it in very simple languages to our families. So far, it's like, I think we've only had one family come in when they were not able to get the trach back in, and but they went through the scenario and were able to get the child back to the hospital, and there wasn't any major consequences from it. But when we teach them as they're learning how to do things. You know, it's like that question and answer thing that you do, that assessment. You know, every time you come in there, okay, what are you going to do if the trach comes out? What are you going to do if the trach's plugged? What are you going to do if you can't get the trach back in? What if all of that doesn't work? Well, then what is it that you're going to do? So it's kind of like you're constantly repeating, and you're having them repeat to you what it is they're going to do in case of an emergency. I hope that answers your question.
And those steps are laid out in our tracheostomy handbook, which the families start reading even before the tracheostomy is placed. And then the education occurs throughout their hospitalization and beyond.
Great.
So I hope that answers your question.
We got two questions for Ram. One question is asking, how many have been certified in your program thus far? And another is asking, can you list some, if not all, of the 14 core skills taught?
Okay. In terms of the numbers, we're nearing 80 now over the last couple of years. It doesn't sound like a lot, and frankly, it isn't a lot. So we're trying to raise the awareness of this particular certification. But I don't know if you read anything about what's going on in the UK. The NHS, our National Health Service, is always strapped with money. Although we spend £120 billion on the health service, you can't even buy a pencil in it. So it's very difficult for individuals to access this. So we get some support from the industry. We're hoping to increase that number through a variety of mechanisms that we're now developing with local hospitals and critical care units. But I think the actual numbers that should be coming through should be 10, 20, 30, 40 times that. And if you take somewhere like the United States, the figures are even larger. So we hope to increase the numbers. What was the second? The second question was the number of topics. There are 14 topics. Now you're going to ask me what they are. I can't remember them all, but there's some basic stuff around performing tracheostomies. That's limited in the sense that usually the surgeons are doing that. And what we're really interested in is once the tracheostomy is in, what goes wrong. So there's an element on immediate post-operative care. There's a whole chunk on critical instances related to tracheostomies, you know, inadvertent extubation or blockage, the sorts of things that Diane has mentioned. We have the role of the physiotherapist, and there's a whole chunk on speech and language therapy, how to go through a weaning program, swallowing, speech, above above cord vocalization. What else have we introduced? We introduced obviously all the types of tracheostomy tubes, because they can be very, very confusing for the uninitiated, and what the relevance are of these. We also introduce an element on ventilation and long-term tracheostomies, and also how to get individuals out into the community safely, sort of looking at the sorts of things that Diane and Sam just mentioned about educating patients. So there's some of the topics. I don't suppose it's completely comprehensive about every item of tracheostomy, but we have teased out, we think, the core 14. If there's any others that people think are very, very important, if they look at the program on the website, we'll be very happy to hear from you and consider incorporating them.
All right. We do have one comment with someone asking if your handbook is available online. Diane, I believe. But we do have a couple of questions about staff competencies and how you deal with training staff in multidisciplinary education.
Sorry, what was that? Didn't quite catch that. What was the question?
It was on staff competencies.
All right.
Okay. As far as staff competencies, what we usually do is we offer a 1-hour CEU course. Actually, it's mandatory, and it's with it is with orientation. As soon as any employee, either a nurse or a respiratory therapist, comes to work at our institution, they have to go through a certain orientation, and that is when it is covered. And they actually get a continuing education unit for it, And in the case of nurses, it's actually a trauma hour because it goes over what to do with the tracheostomy. So, and then for respiratory therapists, what we'll do is once a year, we actually have a competency day that everyone has to come in and go through the procedures and what we're going to do, and if we've made any changes to the program at all. So that's what we do here.
Well, in the UK, it's fairly poor, I'm afraid. You seem very well organised, Diane. We in the UK are very, very poorly organised. We have individuals who barely know what a tracheostomy is, who are, you know, supposed to look after these in the middle of the night, get transfers from other wards or from ITU. And this was the reason for the NC pod inquiry and the National Tracheostomy Safety Project, because it highlighted the enormous gap between what should be happening and what was actually happening. So I think the competencies need a major overhaul. As far as the UK is concerned, I'm sure it's large pockets of the US and Australia or India or wherever you guys are, it's probably very similar. Tracheostomy has been a sort of rather poor brother of other major elements within medicine. So the principle in the old days was you stuck a tracheostomy in and then somebody looked after it. Well, I think that's all going to change and must change if we're going to improve patient safety, reduce patient mortality or make it zero, and certainly reduce their morbidity. And as far as possible, which is what we want to do, is to get patients to remove their tracheostomies if that's possible. Maybe not so possible in children, but certainly in adults, that should be our aim. We shouldn't be sending individuals home necessarily with tracheostomies in the numbers that we have been doing so in the past. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement, whoever asked that question.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as the book goes, if you contact Haley and she will send me your email. I have everything on files on my computer, and if I have to make any changes, I will be able to do it that way. But I would be more than happy to send you a copy of the files that I have and how I go through everything. I kind of updated them last year because you remember those generations we were talking about. We have the millennial generation who, you know, they don't like to read through things. What they actually asked you for was, okay, can you just make me a list? So what I ended up doing was putting a quick start menu in for certain things like tracheostomy care, for tracheostomy changes when you go to suction a patient. So it's like you explain everything in the words, but then separately what I'll have is first you do this, then you do that, then you do something else. And that seemed to work out for a lot of my younger families.
Great. I think we have time for one more question.
Okay.
Someone's asking if, what's it? Do you and can you provide a resource that has sort of a universal best practices for respiratory therapists that take care of patients with a tracheostomy? Something that bridges what is done in the UK and here in the States, and I'm sure that applies to Australia and other countries as well.
I think respiratory therapists are just in the United States and Canada. I actually had a conversation with Brendan McGrath last year sometime because there are no respiratory therapists in the UK or Australia, and we talked a lot about what the differences were. That you have respiratory physiotherapists over in the UK, but I think their scope of service is a little bit different than they are here in the United States. So really it's just, I would like to see something internationally. I am a member of the American Association of Respiratory Care, So if you want any more information about respiratory therapists, you could go to www.aarc.org to find out more information.
I also think that from a medical standpoint, I don't think that there is really a ultimate guide to best practices. I think that what the Global Tracheostomy Collaborative has tried to achieve is try to put together the best literature as possible and the best minds as possible and share this information. So I think through the GTC website, I'm pretty sure that we have a number of quality references available, including those that seminal research from the UK, like the NTSP, that have some of these nuggets. For example, the flow diagram, which outlines what to do in tracheostomy emergencies. But I think we're yet to have that ultimate guide.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think it's not rocket science. Okay, so I think one has to get away from the fact that you need huge amounts of detail. Tracheostomy care needs to be taught appropriately. We know what the core elements are. There is some detail that might vary between the US and UK and Australia, but the core 95, 96, 97% is going to be exactly the same. The tube's not going to change, the suction technique's not going to change. Maybe some of the drugs you use are different, but generally speaking, 95, 96% is going to be exactly the same. Whether we call them respiratory therapists or we call them physiotherapists, fundamentally the work is very similar. So I wouldn't worry too much about whether it's UK-based or USA-based or Australia-based. In the end, the patient almost requires the same thing. I mean, Diane's no different from ladies here in the UK, and Sam is no different from me in terms of what I need from a tracheostomy and what he might need from a tracheostomy. So I think if you develop something, if you look at the literature that Sam has alluded to, there's lots of stuff out there, and you're going to find that 95, 96% actually concurs with what you do or you should be doing. So please don't be frightened about subtle little differences. The broad brush is exactly the same.
All right, and with that, we're out of time. I've been asked to put in a plug for the International Tracheostomy Symposium, which is happening in February. You can go to our website at www.globaltrach.org. Diane and Ram, any send-offs?
Sorry, but I didn't miss that. I had an elder moment, sorry.
Okay, we're ending the webinar, so if you want to say any goodbyes.
Okay,
all right.
Thank you very much.
For listening. Thank you. Nice to see you, Diane and Sam.
Thank you.
Hopeful meeting in February, I think. Okay.
Thank you.
Look forward to it.
Very much.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye. Take care.